Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Internal Compass podcast. I'm Samuel Archambault. I am your host. I'm a osteopath and kinesiologist. Today's topic, we are going to talk a little bit more about nutrition and pain management. So first of all, this is a very wide, very complex topic. So I'm never going to pretend that I'm going to cover everything that regards to nutrition and pain management in only about 20 minutes. That being said, I want to keep this very concrete, something that you can take a lot out of. But also, I want to circle back to basic recommendations that you already know, because you'll see like nutrition, just like physical activity or stress management, really come back to complex explanations. So you'll see that the processes themselves, they're quite complicated. But at the end of the day, when you look back at, okay, that's cool, but what do we do with those things? They always come back to very basic, very simple recommendations that you already know. But at the end of today, if I'm at least able to build a little bit more your awareness around what you eat and how does that food makes you feel, does it trigger more your pain or does it actually help you cope better with the pain, then my role is a success, or let's say my job is a success in the context of this podcast. So let's get started. First of all, we have to talk about the inflammation process if we're going to talk about nutrition, because every time you eat something, it will trigger an inflammatory process in your gut and in your digestive system. I will say that again. Every time you eat, and that is no matter what you eat, it will create a stress response, an inflammatory response in your digestive system. And you know what? That is normal. And we cannot escape it because what we eat is going to be composed of many different things, many different size of molecules that some will be absorbed, some not. So this whole inflammatory process is kind of normal and wanted in a way that it will kind of allow the lining of your gut to say yes to some nutrients and no to some other nutrients that you don't want in. The problem lies when we're talking about pain management and nutrition. I would say that the problem lies when this inflammation process kind of take too much space or take too much intensity. So picture yourself that your gut lining, so whenever you eat, right, your small intestine, right in your belly, where the food ends up after being in your stomach, you're starting to chew it, then it goes down your esophagus, goes in your stomach, and then it goes through your duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine, and then ends up in your small intestine, where you start assimilating food, right? Of course, there's a whole bunch of different hormones and also different substances that will help you digest this specific food. But for now, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about what happens when that food gets broken down into specific molecules, protein, carbohydrates, fats, and the like, and they're being absorbed. So I want you to picture that your gut lining is like a wall, right? So that wall is composed actually of one layer of cell. And a cell is really, really tiny. So it's really not that big. And that wall is kind of the only protection that we have between what we eat and after that, what gets into our body. Of course, it's a physical wall, but we have our immune system that's there to kind of defend, right? So think about that wall. Think that we are in some kind of a medieval age here, and then on this wall there are specific gates, and then there are guards at this gate. And then, of course, we want the gate to open once in a while because we want the good stuff to come in, right? Protein, carbohydrates, all the molecules that we'll need, the nutrients that we'll need to function and to survive. The problem is when we eat specific food that are going to trigger a, let's say, more intense inflammatory response, then it's like we're making some holes in the wall. It's like if the food kind of attack this layer of cells, so this wall, and create some holes in it that there are no guards there. So it's not necessarily the fact that the wall gets broken down, because guess what? It will be repaired, right? The body is really good at repairing itself. That's going to happen no matter what. The problem is that during this time that there are some holes in this wall, well, there are some specific molecules that are going to pass that are not supposed to pass. And especially larger molecules that normally they are kind of excluded, and they will be pushed out your body through your feces. But now they are actually able to get in your body. Of course, some of them are going to be captured by your immune system, which is great. But some of them are going to make their way through the circulation, through your blood circulation, and then they might end up in a specific area of your body and create some more inflammation. And inflammation, if we accumulate it, might end up into pain. That means that maybe, right? There's very hard to say if what amount of inflammation is going to result into specific pain. But one thing for sure, think about it this way. The more inflamed your body is in general, the more susceptible you are to pain. And the less resilience your body have to cope with pain. That means that if you are very inflamed you add this food stress that now we've been talking about, you've been adding now this maybe psychological stress, emotional stress, all of this creates some inflammation in your body that kind of doesn't necessarily create pain, but kind of build this terrain, build this context into which you're more susceptible to feel higher level of pain for the same stimuli. So example, if you know that you have a lower back pain, but you can notice that if you eat very inflammatory food, such as very ultra processed food, sugary, very fat and salty food, all of those things are going to make your back pain probably feel worse, even though nothing else has changed. So it's not necessarily that the food itself creates the pain, but let's say it breaks down the defense of your body to be resilient to that same pain. So I hope this makes sense a little bit, and that now you're able to better understand how does this work. Of course, this is really simplified, right? There are much more different things at play here, but overall the picture is this: the more you consume food that will trigger inflammation, the more you create holes in your digestive system that will absorb certain molecules that you don't want and that are going to create inflammation. And remember, inflammation in your body can be anywhere. It can be in your brain. It can be anywhere in your body that you already have inflammation. That's actually worse, because if you already have a spot that is inflamed because of overuse, example, well, that inflammation is going to be, let's say, it will be definitely worse if you are just adding and adding up. So I want to cover some myth around inflammation. And the first one I already told you is that inflammation is bad. Now you might say, oh my God, every time I consume that, this is really bad. Well, of course, no. Inflammation is a normal process, right? And that inflammation that happens in your gut is actually there to repair your gut. So inflammation is like sending a whole bunch of soldiers to patch up this hole in the wall that the inflammatory food has been creating, right? So of course it's going to bring a whole bunch of people there, and it's going to kind of destroy a little bit maybe the ground around it, and makes a little bit of damage there. But at the end of the day, that's what we want, because those soldiers are going to be able to repair the wall and push back the enemy at that point. So it's not necessarily that inflammation is bad. It's actually what we want in that case. It's the fact that when we have too much of it, and in areas that creates pain, then eventually too much of anything, that is not necessarily good for us in the long term, right? Another common myth that I hear is that sugar, fat, that processed food or carbohydrates or any food that has been labeled as bad, those foods are bad and you should put them away forever. Take a step back and think that nutrition is much larger than specific foods or specific molecule or specific nutrients. They are food as a whole. And of course, you have to look at trends. If you eat one time chocolate, if you eat one time candy, it's not going to change anything to your inflammation levels. I'm telling you, this has to be over a long period of time. And that's why, as boring as that sounds, I'm a big fan of habits. Because if you build habits that are helping you, build that resilience, then if you deviate from those habits and you do have some sugar or put whatever you want to put in there, processed food, then you are going to come back to your healthy habits anyhow. And your body is going to be resilient enough to manage this inflammation and not do a big deal around it. So don't go crazy about it. Just make sure that you can follow some specific, or let's say some general guidelines around food. And I'm going to touch to that a little bit later on. Elevated blood sugar is bad. When we eat carbohydrates, it's bad for our blood. No, it's bad again in the long term. And that's what can happen with diabetics, is that the sugar that they have in their blood cannot access their cell. But you know what? If you're not diabetic, most of us have insulin, and that's what it does. It will take the sugar in our blood and put it into our cell. And guess what? We need that energy to be able to function. So elevated blood sugar is not bad. Elevated blood sugar over a long period of time is very bad. It's actually toxic for our body. But then if that's the case, there is a dysregulation in your normal system, in your hormonal system. And in that case, I would strongly recommend you to consult a doctor and make sure that this is treated properly. Doesn't matter if it's type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes. Dairy, gluten, any other bad trend, all of those things are bad. Again, no. You'll see sometimes that dairy creates inflammation, gluten creates inflammation, maybe in some people and not in everybody. Nutrition is very unique, very personalized to each individual. And you know what? As unscientific as this might sound, try it for yourself. If you eat dairy yourself, or if you're lactose intolerant or you're gluten intolerant, well, guess what? You might want to get that out of your diet, because you will automatically feel this inflammation process in your body. You might feel very bloated. You might have a lot of gas. You might have even some pain in your abdomen. So, of course, some people are more respondent to others. Does that mean that the food or that type of food is bad and everybody should take it out of their diet? Of course not. It always depends on how it makes you feel, right? Or the last one I want to touch on is you need to eat organic. No, you don't. Eating organic is great. If it makes you feel better, that's amazing. But another side of the coin is that eating organic might be difficult for people and might also be out of reach, very expensive. So I would say, before focusing on eating organic, focus on eating very basic food close to nature that you cook yourself. Fruit, vegetables, good source of protein. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. But something that is not complicated, minimally processed, and has a lot of variety, a lot of colors. If you are able to aim that, you've done 80% of the solution. All right, let's carry on here. So if we link, I want to talk a bit about nutrition psychology, because one thing that we tend to forget about nutrition and how it's linked to pain is that it's not only the nutrition, what we eat. And that's what we think, right? We think that it's only what we eat that matters. There's actually much more to the story. Here are different factors that will influence how the same food you consume is going to affect your level of inflammation and therefore your pain level, how you feel pain in your body. Of course, there is what you eat, right? We have already talked about that. But the environment into which you eat the food, who you are going to eat the food with, your perception of that food. If you perceive that food as being good versus bad, it's going to have a different effect on your body. That's as crazy as that. Our mind is very, very powerful. If you eat slowly or mechanically, or if you are able to, or if you eat very, very fast and you're in a stress state, that's going to have a different effect. And also, why do you eat? Do you eat because you are stressed? Do you eat because you have an emotional need? Do you eat because you're bored? Or do you actually eat because you want to connect with people or that you need energy? All of those things will have an impact. So again, today's episode I'm not going to tell you exactly what to eat. I'm going to tell you just be mindful of your practices around eating. And those things you have control on, and they have a huge effect on how that same food you're going to eat is going to affect your pain level and how you perceive pain at the end of the day, because that's the goal, right? So if now you understand a little bit more how specific food, or not specific food, but how food in general will induce this inflammatory process, right? I guess you understand this wall analogy, and you understand also that how you're going to consume that food is as important as what you're going to consume. Then what are the tools? What can we do? So first of all, I would say that the first recommendation I would give you is simply aim at eating around 80% of your food should be vegetables, fruits, and lean protein and plants. So if you have unprocessed food and foods that you can, or let's say not ultra processed food, because you are going to grill something on the pan, it becomes processed, right? So maybe aim at not eating ultra processed food, but really cooking your food. That is the greatest thing you could ever do. Being close to nature when it comes to what you consume, and think that the less ingredient it has and the closer to nature it is, normally speaking, normally there are exceptions, but normally speaking, you're going to go into the right production. So of course you want to also have those foods that, by the way, will actually help to reduce the inflammation process, or not necessarily reduce, but modulate it so that it's just the right dose that you need to be able to recover from the stress of eating, but also not having too much inflammation so that you let those enemies inside. Plant-based diet or Mediterranean diet, if you're interested, all of those things have been shown to really help the level of pain that you're going to feel depending on what you eat. So of course this falls into the bucket of what you eat. Being a little bit more mindful of your gut microbiome, right? Those little microbes that are in your gut that helps to digest and absorb the food. You can actually grow them by eating specific food, such as anything that's fermented, kimchi, sauerkraut, kombucha. Those are all examples of food that are fermented and that can actually help you develop or grow a bit more this microbiome. Maintaining a healthy weight is actually a great way for you to reduce your overall inflammation. You have to see nutrition as something part of bigger, right? Those things are all connected within each other. So of course, what you eat is going to matter. But if you are able to maintain a terrain, a context where your body, your mind, and your overall health are in the right direction, then of course, it doesn't matter as much what you're going to eat, right? So all of that is within balance, of course. Eating a high level of protein, it's going to be very protective for your muscular mass and overall will fill you up more also. So that's going to help to reduce you eating more ultra processed food. Good at healthy fats, where we're talking about monosaturated and polyunsaturated fats, so such as avocado oil, nuts and seeds. This is a very good also source. Olive oil, another great source of healthy fats. Of course, this is very useful for your overall metabolism, for your brain health, for building some hormones. But of course, also it's really dense in energy. So be careful not to have too much, but a little bit is going to be very beneficial for you. Last thing I would like to say is to perhaps limit caffeine and alcohol. Although those can be consumed in small amount, there is no, in excess, let's say, there is no real benefit of having more of those. Even if caffeine makes you more awake after a certain amount, it's just going to make yourself more anxious. And same thing for alcohol. It's a drug, it's a depressor. So of course, if you have too much, it's going to create inflammation. So in moderation, that's great. And perhaps one more thing I would like to say is think about the context into which you're consuming those foods, right? Now I've been talking a lot about what you can change in terms of what you eat, but also create awareness around people that you eat your food with. How do you sit down to eat your food? Do you eat in your car? All of those things are going to have an impact. So maybe you can work on what you're going to eat, but also work on how do you eat this food? How do you consume this food? What's your relationship with food? Are you seeing food as a way to cope, or are you seeing food as a way to connect with other people? Are you seeing food as um, something that you're going to consume when you're bored? Or are you seeing food as something to be creating with because you want to cook, right? So the relationship that you have with food is as important as what you're going to consume. All of those things have an impact on your pain levels. So today, maybe you're thinking, well, Sam, I don't know what supplement should I take, what food I should eat. I gave you a couple of food that can help, but you see that we come back to very basic stuff. Eat plants, eat good amount of quality protein, not so fat, not so high in saturated fat, clean stuff, eat a lot of plant, drink good amount of water, and forget most of the ultra processed stuff that you can have once in a while. Same thing for alcohol and caffeine that you can have on a moderate basis. And everything is going to be fine. Trust your body, trust your physiology that's going to be able to be resilient to those things, and don't overthink it, right? And remember, eat food with people you love. It's going to make a great effect on how you absorb this food. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. So I'll see you in 2 weeks for another episode of the Internal Compass podcast.